Okay, yeah, no worries.
Okay, so you should see that button on top. It says that we're live.
Mhm.
Um, Still loading for me. Okay, cool. And then I'm gonna send this link.
I have like a 10-second delay.
Oh no.
So.
Okay, yeah, no.
Okay. Okay, cool. So now everything's sent out. We can give it like a minute or so for people to come on, and then you can probably just get started.
Cool, yeah.
Yeah. I'll do a quick intro and then you can get started.
Mhm.
All right, I think I'm gonna start it around now. All right, everyone, thank you for coming to our pitching workshop. Today we are partnering with Texas Convergent, which is another organization at UT Austin, to kind of just teach you guys about the basics of pitching. So Chinmay is here to kind of give this workshop, so I'm gonna let her introduce herself.
So yeah, thanks, Dee Dee. I'm Chinmay, and I'm the Incubator Director of Texas Convergent. And today I'm going to be giving you just some tips that we usually give to students in our organization who are getting ready to do pitches. So I think I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think you might need to enable co-host.
Sorry about that. There you go. I think it should work now.
Awesome. Okay. Awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. So just a quick intro about me again. I'm a rising senior computer science major. I'm incubator director of Texas Convergent, and I'm currently an APM intern on Google AI. And today we're just going to dive into some fundamentals of pitches. So what are the key elements of a really good pitch? And what are some interesting things that should be included in every pitch? Like what are the spikes? And then we can address any questions that any of you might have. So these are the core elements of a pitch. The first is team introduction. Now there's like a bit of a controversy in terms of when you should do the team introduction. Typically you do it at the beginning, but some business pitches have started doing it at the very end. So it really just depends on you and your team, how you want to go about it. I would still recommend probably doing it in the beginning so it doesn't interrupt the rest of the flow. But yeah, so the team introduction, then you have the problem, you want to talk about your users, and then you want to talk about your solution. And your solution, you want to break it down into a couple of different things. First, you want to talk about the product. So what is it that you built? And then you want to talk about differentiation. So how did you separate yourself from competitors? The third is you want to give, a demo of your product or, images of certain workflows, mocks that you have. And then fourth is talking about your process. And then after that, you want to close off with solid next steps. Okay, so the team is this is the most basic element of the pitch. You want to have a slide with the headshots, the names, and then the roles. And if you're just doing a verbal pitch and you don't have slides, make sure everyone gets a chance to introduce themselves. And one of the key elements of introducing your team is making sure energy levels match between the different speakers. You don't want one speaker to be speaking really loud and the next speaker to be super quiet, because that's like a really jarring contrast and it detracts from the value of the pitch. And this is something that you should continue throughout the pitch itself. So if you're doing handoffs between different team members, make sure that the person is ready and make sure you're doing like a natural transition. Like, oh, now I'm going to hand it off to Dee to talk about the market or something like that. Like, make it very clear who you're handing it off to so the viewers are prepared for for like a transition between the speakers. Okay. So one of the biggest things that I always go by whenever I'm working on a project or preparing a pitch is I think of Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. And if you haven't heard of this, basically it's a methodology to help you structure your thinking around whatever it is that you're doing. So the first thing that you have to consider is your why, which is the purpose. And then after that, you want to think about the process, and then you want to think about the results. So this is what happens when you're building the product. In the form of a pitch, you want to rearrange these so it flows a little bit better, like a story. But generally, you want to have all three of these components in order to make a really strong pitch. Okay. So the first thing is you want to talk about your problem. And as you can tell, like, we're starting at the very center circle. So we're starting with the why. It's very important to know and to tell your audience about what problem are you actually solving and why it needs to be solved. And then you need to elaborate on the size of the problem. So to answer these three questions, you can use things like stories, anecdotes, things you read in the news, metrics that you have. You really want to engage the user with or engage your audience with as many details as you possibly can. Make it specific and memorable. One thing a lot of people do is they don't really start off their pitch in a very strong way. So if you have a very big problem you're solving, start with like a broad statement. Like, imagine you're a resident of New York City walking down the street, and then you come across a taxi that cuts somebody off and nearly resulting in a car accident. And then you have like, then you transition to your product that's helping people, better detect or pedestrians better detect like car accidents or something like that. And so if you're doing something like that, a story that's a little jarring or that wakes people up, it's really impactful when you're talking about your problem. Okay, now the second thing that we want to address is our users, and these still fall under the why component. So who does this affect? How many people does it affect? And eventually you want to talk about what is the size of your target market. Even though, again, this is on a separate slide, it shouldn't necessarily take up too much time in your pitch. You should just be really clear who is going to use this and why they're going to use it. Okay, and then the next part is the solution. So this was a part of your summer hackathon. So all of you have built things, awesome things throughout the course of the summer. So you really want to be sure that the audience that you're speaking to understands, okay, what is your product and what are the features of your product? And you don't just want to focus on like individual components that you added, and you want to talk more about your solutions. Like, how did you solve a problem for the user? Because people, when you're giving like a very technical demonstration, it's very easy to get bogged down into the details, but you really want to talk about, okay, well, how did this implementation affect the user's journey? How did this impact a user positively? How are we making something simpler, easier, faster for the user to navigate? And so that's what your product description should show. Another easy way that I think that you can introduce your product is you can say something like, you can provide analogies for your features. You can also provide analogies for the product itself. And I think I go a little bit deeper into this in a following slide. Okay, so the next part is the differentiation. So this is like the what. You want to be really clear about how this is different from something that already exists. Because if you're if you took part in this hackathon and you've developed something or you've changed something that isn't the traditional way of doing it in the industry, you want to really draw that out. And a really good way to do that is potentially having a table that compares your competitors and their offerings and what you are offering. So be really clear about what is it about your product or what you've built that's unique. Okay. And the next part is the demo. So in this 5-minute, I was told that you only have 5 minutes to pitch. So you may not have enough time to do a detailed demo, but do like a brief walkthrough and explain as you go. So don't just like click around and expect the user or like expect the audience to follow. Explain, oh, okay, we're on the login screen. So let's like input our name, login in credentials, and then go ahead and log on. So explain as you go, because then it draws the audience in, it makes them feel like they're following along. So even if they look away for a second, they have heard you, they know what you're doing. And you want to make this as easy to follow and understand as possible, because again, with technical demos, if you have a bunch of pages on your web app, or if you have a bunch of screens on your mobile app, you could come to a stage where you don't really understand, where the audience can no longer follow what it is you're doing. So you want to make sure that you're making it as clear as possible, and you have a very brief run through of what you want to cover. Okay. And then the last part of the solution is the process. So how did you build this? What tools did you use? What did you learn? Since this was a part of like a 12-week hackathon, this is basically like an internship. So you do want to spend a little bit of time talking about everything that resulted from this. So like what happened in your mentor meetings, what kind of technologies did you learn? How did you incorporate your learnings into what you're doing? Because I think that makes for a very compelling pitch, because you're able to show, we started off here, and then by working and learning together and building this product, we came here. So you want to show some growth. Awesome. And then the next steps are just, what are you going to do next, and how are you going to improve on what you've already created? And this is really important because you want to show that you have a lot of momentum and you have a really good trajectory. You have a good idea of where you're going, and you have concrete ways of getting there. So outlining like bullet points of like perhaps like 3 or 4 steps ahead. And it doesn't necessarily have to be technical too, right? Like maybe it's that you understand that your product is good, but maybe you haven't really found that product market fit. Like you need to do more research about it, or you need to do more work on your front end design, things like that. You want to make sure that you're holistically thinking about, okay, well, if this was a product that I was launching, what are the other considerations that I would need to make in order to make it happen? Awesome. So then by the end of your pitch, you should cover the why, the how, and the what. It's really important to cover all 3 of these, because your why establishes the purpose. Again, you have to show, the product that you built, you have to show its use, why it's valuable. And then you want to talk about how. You want to make sure you address the fact that you've been in this process for 12 weeks, and you want to show that your process, or the process that you went through, has resulted in a really great product. And then you want to talk about your what. Obviously, you want to talk about your deliverable. You want to spend a considerable amount of time talking about what you've built and what are the functionalities that you've enabled. Okay. And so lastly, we have, just the common things that I think every pitch should have, and that I think adds a lot of flavor and spice to pitches. And these are spikes. So the first one is qualitative data. You want to have anecdotes, you want to have quotes from potential users, and you want to be specific. So if you heard a story or you read a story in the New York Times, quote it. Say like, oh, I read a story recently in the New York Times about such and such. The more specific you are, the more real you make it, the more it draws in your audience. Second, you want to use quantitative data. You want to talk about okay, what is the market size? You want to talk about potential success metrics. How are you going to measure how many people are using this product, or how are you going to measure if people like it, or how many people it's going to impact? The more numbers you throw in, I take that back. Maybe don't have like way too many numbers, but have enough to where it adds that level of interest. You don't want it to be like, oh, this is a large market, and then just stop there. You want to talk about, okay, this is a $70 billion market. This is why it's important. So you have to back up your decisions with data. But again, don't like overdo it. Don't have like numbers in every sentence, because at that point it just gets confusing. But have enough to where people know that you know what you're talking about. And then the third point is having analogies. So it's really important to have comparisons if you can have them. So having something like, we are the Uber of the blank industry. It kind of shows that you're able to correlate how disruptive your product could be, how disruptive your idea could be to a particular industry, and what value it brings. And then lastly, I feel like this is the most underrated component. It's energy. You have to be excited about what you're talking about, and you have to be super enthusiastic. Because if you're not enthusiastic about your product, then why would the listeners be interested and engaged? So you have to be very enthusiastic and passionate, and be sure to smile, because I think sometimes when you get nervous, it can be hard, and you're like, oh, like I'm nervous, I don't want to smile. But be sure you do smile. Make sure everyone who is presenting is smiling, is very engaged, because if you look like you're enjoying it, then your audience is going to enjoy it too. Awesome. So that was it for the content that I had. Are there any questions? I'd be happy to answer anything. I can also go into more detail about anything that I've talked about.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like we have any questions so far, but like there is a 10-second delay, so we'll give it a little bit of time in case anyone thinks of anything now. I think something that like I was curious about as you were talking is just like, you bring up like market fit a lot, and like market size and like things about the market. Can you talk more about like how to kind of figure that out?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can go on this screen. Okay, so the way to figure out your market size, it can be a little difficult if this is the first time that you're going about doing it, but you can think about things like, what industry does your product fall into? So for example, if we take Uber, Uber falls into transportation. So then you can take a look at, okay, what does the transportation market look like? How many cars are on the road? Those are some metrics you can have. You can have how many drivers are there, how many driver's licenses are issued per year. Any kind of metric that you think would be useful to tell in your story. So again, you're trying to create a story potentially around the numbers that you're gathering. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the market size. It could be things related to that. And again, I think like the Wall Street Journal is a good resource, New York Times. Honestly, just Google searching anything, you'll probably come across relevant metrics. Even if you type in like your general product concept into Google and then type in like metrics, something could potentially pop up there as well, to give you ideas on what kind of things you might want to include.
I see. That makes sense. Yeah. I feel like that's something that like in like a hackathon space you don't really typically think about as much as like just the product and like trying to get it to work. So I think that's important to like think about and include and look into more.
Yeah.
All right. I don't think there are any questions. So yeah, I think we can end it here. Well, thank you so much for coming and presenting. This was a great workshop. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, everyone who is watching, or if you're watching later, thank you. If you have any other questions for her, oh, JK, we have a question. Can you give some examples of success metrics, particularly for projects that are not really going to be sold?
Yeah, so for success metrics, you don't necessarily have to have the number. You just have to have a way of potentially getting to the number or what kind of things you would track. So, assuming that you are going to launch, you can track things like how many people downloaded your app or how many, if your product is related to like Uber, for example, like how many people use this ride sharing service per month. Those type of things. Like you want to just you can be a little bit imaginative about it if you're not actually launching the product.
I see. Cool. All right, we will give it a few seconds in case there's any follow-up questions. But yeah, this is really cool. We typically have like a pitching workshop at Hack Texas, and we've had like LEA do it in the past, but this was really great. Would be glad to partner again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, I think that's probably it. Well, thank you everyone else for being here. We are gonna stop the stream, but if you have any other questions that come up later, feel free to like message me and I'll direct them to her over like Slack or anything. So yeah.